and welcome to another episode of Practical IT. In this episode, we're going to take a look at VirtualBox, and we are starting from scratch from a fresh install of VirtualBox. In this particular case, we are using VirtualBox on Windows. However, keep in mind that regardless of what platform you are running VirtualBox on, the procedures shown in this video are going to be the same. So let's get started. Alright, so we've got a fresh install of VirtualBox right here. And if we go to our About VirtualBox, we can see that we're running version 6.0.8. Starting from scratch for people that might be new to VirtualBox. If you've just taken an interest into building a virtual lab, if you've taken an interest in Linux or BSD but aren't quite ready to make the switch to running it full-time on your machine, then this is for you. So on the screen, of course, you're going to have your menus up at the top, Preferences, which also has a toolbar shortcut, import and export, also in the toolbar, virtual media manager, host network manager, cloud profile manager, we'll get back to those in a few moments, network operations manager, check for updates, and reset all warnings. Under machine, new and add, which rounds out our toolbar up here, and of course your standard items and help. Looking at our interface, you start off with tools as your default. You've got other options here. Think of it as a different context that you will be able to use for different actions in VirtualBox. So media, which we also saw in the file menu. Add, properties, refresh, and currently grayed out are copy, move, remove, and release. And we've got hard disks, optical disks, and floppy disks. Network is also worth taking a look at right now. So you've got create, remove, and properties for your toolbar items. By default, you've got a VirtualBox host-only Ethernet adapter set up for you when you install VirtualBox. Where this is useful is if you want to have a virtual machine that is isolated from your network. Or perhaps you want to have multiple virtual machines that can only talk to each other but can't get onto your actual network or out to the internet. Again, as we go through, we will look at some of these different options. So let's switch back to the welcome area, which shows tools. And we're going to set up the framework for a new virtual machine. So for this, we're going to do new. And right off, it's asking for a name for the operating system. And this setup wizard is actually pretty smart. So if I put in Ubuntu, it's automatically going to change the type to Linux and the version to Ubuntu 64-bit. The other thing you want to take note of at this point is the machine folder. So currently, by default, it's going to put your virtual machines in your user directory under VirtualBox VMs. You can change this, you can reset it. It's all up to how you want to do things. Now, if you are starting fresh, you may very well want to select Other. At that point, you can choose a folder on your own computer, or, for instance, I've got a network drive mapped, and I may want to stick virtual machines on the network. This can be useful if you have limited storage space on your primary machine, and you have a network attached storage or a secondary machine on your network that has more storage space, and you can utilize that. So we're going to cancel this for now, and we're going to stick with the default location, and we're going to click next. Memory size. Now this is where you want to have a little research prepared ahead of time. Now I know, because I use Linux quite regularly, that for an Ubuntu desktop machine, you want at least 2 gigs of RAM. So we'll give it the minimum there, 2 gigs of RAM, and we'll go ahead and click next. Recommended size for the hard drive is 10 gigs. Follow through, next, next. Generally, you want to select dynamically allocated versus fixed size. Now, you may be wondering what the difference is here. Dynamically allocated will only use the needed space for the virtual machine. So, for instance, you might allocate 20 gigabytes to this virtual machine, but after you've installed the operating system and the updates and any additional software, it might only take 7 gigabytes. As you add files and software and do updates, it will expand up to that limit of 20 gigabytes. You do take a slight performance hit doing this. However, if you are running your machine on a solid state drive, you are probably not going to notice the performance hit. Now, the fixed size option, you can probably guess. If you tell it that you want a 20 gigabyte hard drive, virtual hard drive, it's going to allocate that whole 20 gigabytes right at the beginning. And if you're only using 7 gigabytes, it's still going to be actually a 20 gigabyte virtual hard drive. Now, with this all being said, you can change the size of your virtual hard drive after it's created. However, the catch is that you've got to resort to using command line utilities in order to accomplish this task. If you're a beginner, you're going to want to start off usually using dynamically allocated and giving yourself a little extra space, even if you don't think you're going to use it. Once you're comfortable with VirtualBox, it's fine to make your drives a little bit smaller because you can always resize them later. Just food for thought. Alright, so we're going to leave this option as dynamically allocated and click next. Given what I just said a moment ago, we're actually going to increase this to 15 gigabytes. And we're going to say create. Alright, so now you've got the basic framework for your Ubuntu virtual machine. But if you click start, it's not going to do much yet. So what I normally do is I like to go into settings and I like to tweak things a little bit. First thing I do is normally go under system and I turn off the floppy drive. For everything I do, generally speaking, having a virtual floppy drive is completely unnecessary. I then go over to the processor tab and I'll increase to 2 processors. Now you normally want to stick in the green area. For instance, on this particular machine, it's a quad core processor. So you're going to see 4 sections here for each of the physical processor cores. And then in this pinkish red, you're going to see an additional 4. That is because hyper-threading is turned on, and those are virtual processor cores. I normally turn on PAE NX and then I go on to display. For video memory, I normally, if I'm using a desktop operating system, I'm going to max this out at 128 megs, and then I'm going to enable 3D acceleration. For graphics controller, under normal circumstances, you want to stick with the VM SVGA option. That is the newest option for the graphics controller, and unless you run into problems, you want to leave it at that default. So next we'll go to storage, and this is where you can set up your boot device. You'll normally boot an operating system to install it from a virtual optical drive. So we'll go ahead and select that, and then click the little disk icon over here and choose virtual optical disk file. An optical disk file is an ISO image. An ISO image can be used for multiple things. You can use it to boot and install for an operating system, or you can take that ISO image and physically burn it to a CD so you can use it on another system. A third option is using a tool such as Rufus or Yumi or Balena Etcher, and you can create a USB boot disk from this ISO image. We'll get into that at another time. In this case, we're going to choose the Ubuntu 1904 desktop AMD 64 ISO image. We're going to say open. It did not contain live in the file name, so we are not going to check the box here. The next thing we want to do is go to network. The default is NAT, Network Address Translation. This is going to stick the adapter on a private subnet, which is probably not what you want. If you want it to be on your network, you want to choose bridged adapter. Now, if you wanted this to be a VM where you're going to do testing, you might be running security software that you don't want run on your production network. It might interfere with other people in your household being able to access the internet. If that is the case, then you would want to use one of the other options, either internal or host only. And there are different use cases for all of those. For this example, we're going to use bridged. Keep in mind, one option you do have is using bridged when you do the initial setup, run all your updates, and then subsequently you can disable the bridged adapter, and you can enable adapters 2, 3, and or 4, and use those for various scenarios for your particular lab exercise. All food for thought. We will delve into some of those types of examples at another time. So we've made all our setting changes, and we're going to say OK, and we'll go ahead and click Start. And at this point, you are booting into the install for Ubuntu 1904 desktop. Since we decided to grab our ISO image from a network share, this does have a little bit of lag in getting it started. However, once we're actually into the install, you're not going to notice this too much. All right. So we have reached our installer, the beginning of our installer. We're going to say install Ubuntu. Keyboard layout. Select something appropriate for your location. We're going to choose to install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi, etc. Alright, for our purposes today, we're going to use the minimal installation and we're going to install our third-party software. And we'll click continue. In just a moment, it should kick us to the next screen. So, assuming you're a beginner, we're going to select and just use the default option, erase disk and install Ubuntu. Now, one of the questions I get from a lot of people that are just starting out is whether this is going to erase their Windows. And the answer to that is no. If you recall from earlier in this demonstration, we created a virtual hard drive. In this case, when you're installing in a virtual machine, the erase disk and install option is referring to your virtual hard drive. There is nothing to worry about when it comes to your Windows, macOS, or Linux or BSD installation that's running on your physical computer. So the easiest option is erase disk and install Ubuntu. We can ignore the other options at this point. The goal today is to get this up and running for you. So we'll say install now and continue. This is just a verification screen. And it asks for your time zone. You can just continue. It's pretty good about picking up time zones. I've never had an issue. And so it asks for your user information. And I'm going to speed through this and be back in just a moment. Alright, we're going to require a password to log in. And continue. And at this point, it's going to continue doing its install, and so I'm going to fast forward through this and we'll be back in just a few moments. Alright, we've reached the end of our install and we can just go ahead and restart the VM. And I will return once this has restarted. We can go ahead and press enter. And in another moment we should be booted into our new virtual machine. Alright, we can go ahead and log in with the password we specified at install time. And we've completed our basic install of Ubuntu, and now we are just doing the graphical information collection piece. We're going to skip online accounts. We're not going to send system information. Leave the privacy alone for the moment. And it's just telling us about loading apps because we did a minimal install. I'm going to go ahead and say done on that. The one thing I'll do from here is install the Guest Additions CD. You run. Enter your password for authentication. And this will get the additional drivers installed on Ubuntu. The process is basically the same for any other operating you're installing in VirtualBox. You get a little extra performance and additional drivers, and it just makes the system run a little bit more smoothly if you install this. Already getting notifications that an update is ready. We'll skip that for the moment. But at this point we have completed the install and we've put in place the VirtualBox Guest Additions, which should be just about to finish. After a reboot of the virtual machine, that will all be in place and ready to go, and we should be able to change our screen resolution to something a little bit more usable. I like to do these end-to-end type videos once in a while because everybody starts from somewhere. And if a video like this can help someone who is just getting started, you know, that person that's entering college, or, you know, upper end of elementary school or into middle school or high school, I'm happy to make these because virtualization has been around for quite a while. It's going to be around for a long while to come, and it's a good starting point for learning different things. So we'll stick around until this finishes the Guest Additions install, and then we'll wrap the video up. In a second part of the VirtualBox series, we will go through and look at some of the other options that are available for us now that we've got a virtual machine installed. So stay tuned for future videos on VirtualBox and some additional information on how you might want to set up some labs for your learning enjoyment. Because honestly, it's always more fun to learn with hands-on by actually doing something than it is to just watch videos and try to pick up as much information as you can. Or, you know, in a formal learning environment, you're still required to do a lot of reading. If you can actually show that you've done things and provide some proof to people, then you're a little bit ahead of the game. Oh, look at that. We didn't even have to restart. It actually bumped up our screen resolution without even doing anything. Alright, so we'll say remind me later for the updates, and I'm just curious to see what it gave us for a screen resolution, because we still got the Windows taskbar down here. So 1280 by 919. Kind of an odd thing, but hey, it works. And I'm sure if we bump this up to full screen, would probably end up with a 1280 by 1024. But that gets us started. And stay tuned, there's more to come. We'll be doing more with VirtualBox and setting up some labs and having some fun with this stuff. On that note, this is Jeremy signing off for Practical IT. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.